Nikita, thanks so much for taking your time. It's my pleasure to introduce Nikita Dvornik to everyone. Nikita has joined Pear and Samsung AI Labs as a postdoc this year, right? As we just discussed, he has been to Uber ATG before. You did his PhD in INRIA in France, and his undergrad in math at MIPT. What does MIPT stand for? I'm curious.
Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology.
Yeah, physics and technology. I remember now. So it's great, Nikita, to have you. Nikita will be talking today about representation learning via global temporal alignment and cycle consistency. And it is work that he has been doing together with Samsung AI and Pear Lab. Nikita, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, actually, today I'm going to talk about the other paper. It's called Drop-DTW, and it's about aligning command signal between sequences and dropping the outliers from those sequences simultaneously. So this work is a collaboration between Samsung AI Center and University of Toronto, and so the collaboration with all these great people. So why sequence alignments? One might think that it's not very useful, but this is actually a key tool for analysis in different domains. For example, in video analysis, one can put two videos representing the same activity in correspondence with each other, frame by frame, using sequence alignment, even though they may be of different length. The same goes for protein analysis. By aligning different proteins of different length, one can define a meaningful distance between them. It's also possible to align sequences from different modalities. So one can align audio to the visual sequences, and one can align, for example, video to a sequence of sentences. And this can be particularly interesting in, for example, instructional or like cooking videos. We can align a video with a set of instructions from the recipe, and thus we can localize those instructions in the video. So classically, alignment task is solved using dynamic time warping. It's a classical algorithm, and it's like very popular for alignment. So now we will kind of do a rundown of how it works. On this very simple example, we're trying to align two videos of a handwritten digit 3 moving from one corner of the square to another by diagonal. So the signal is basically the same, it's just that the handwritings are different and those digits are moving with different speed. So how are we gonna align them? First thing we do, we encode all of the frames one by one, and we obtain the feature representation for each of them. Second step, we're going to compute the pairwise cost match matrix. So what it represents is that it gives the cost of matching every pair of elements. So the higher the cost, the less likely the elements are to be matched. So this is sort of a measure of dissimilarity between the elements. And then the Drop-DTW postulates that the optimal alignment between these two sequences is given by the path from one corner of this matrix to another that has the minimum accumulated cost. And this makes sense. So now the alignment between these two sequences would be given by this green path, and we can see that it has lower accumulated cost than pink or red path. And so the lighter the cell here, the lower the cost. So, all right, how do we formalize it? This can be formalized as an optimization problem where our goal is to find the binary matrix M that represents a path from one corner to another using ones and put zeros everywhere. And so this binary matrix M has to give the smallest scalar product with the cost matrix. And it's actually possible to solve this optimization problem efficiently using dynamic programming. And as an output, we get this matching matrix M star that, as we said, contains this path over here made of ones, zeros everywhere. So like this guy. And then we also get the minimum cost of matching. So this is called the cost of alignment. C star, this is just this dot product. So how does it work under the hood, this dynamic programming? Well, first, as in any dynamic programming, we have this dynamic programming table, D, and the ij value contains the optimal cost of matching subsequences Z starting at the beginning, finishing at I, and X starting at the beginning, finishing at J. So this definition basically allows us to define a recurrence for computing every cell in this table. So it looks like that. And what it says is actually the cost of matching sequences is the cost of matching the subsequences of same length minus 1 plus the cost of matching the end elements. And so while we're in the table, we're basically filling in the cells like that. If we want to fill the cell, we find the minimum, the neighbor with the minimum value, and we basically add it up here with the cost of matching these two elements. And it's very important because if we have chosen this neighbor that had the minimum cost, we basically will transition here, and this defines the direction, the optimal path that would lead to this point. And so let's imagine that we filled in the whole table, and then the cost of matching these two sequences will lie in the last element, so the bottom right element here. And to find the alignment path, we basically have to trace back from this last element. And we're done. So that's great. And now let's come back to the original sequences themselves. And so each pair of elements that's lying on this optimal path is now matched to each other, and it's linked by this like green link. And so this is the alignment with DTW. And here, to make it crystal clear, I took an example just from the internet where two sequences into D are being matched to each other. And on the left here, kind of like online as we go, we put the elements of the sequences in correspondence. And on the right, we sort of traverse this cost matrix and finding this minimum cost path here. So this is how DTW works. So as we could see, DTW is great at aligning trimmed sequences that contain similar signal and do not contain outliers. But what are we going to do if there are outliers here? And one may think, like, why is it a big deal? Well, actually, outliers are quite common in different domains. For example, here we would like to match two videos of a tennis serve. And in the first video, the operator shifted his camera and filmed the cheering crowd and then came back to the tennis serve itself. And this cheering crowd has actually nothing to do with the tennis serve itself. So it is considered as an outlier. And in the second video, it is not tightly trimmed. So there is the part of the video in the end that's happening after the tennis serve. So it has nothing in common with tennis serve directly either. So that would be an outlier too. However, if we're aligning these two sequences with each other using DTW, by definition, it has to find a match for every element. So it will have to align the outliers with the signal in the other video, and it will create these wrong matches that are not meaningful. Another domain where outliers are even more common than the signal itself is instructional videos. So those are the videos where humans follow through instructions step by step. And these instructional steps, they're concise and they're spread throughout the video. And most of the video in between the steps is filled with something unrelated to the instructions themselves. So here we would like to, in this example, align two video sequences representing making latte. And making latte consists of three main steps. You pour espresso, you steam milk, and you pour milk. And by aligning these two videos, we would hope to align the instruction steps with each other. But again, DTW by design has to align the outliers to something too, which is not what we want. So, okay, let's look at a simpler example. We're taking our moving digits 3, and now we insert an outlier in the first sequence. It's the digit 0 that has nothing to do with anything. How would this process of aligning look like with DTW? Well, now we make this cost matrix as we used to before, and we see that the cost we have to pay to match this outlier is very high for like matching it to any element from the other sequence. And what we would like to avoid intuitively is to kind of step into this region. So we would like to not match this element. But yet with DTW, we have to do it. We have to step in this region. We have to pay very high cost here and then keep matching elements to each other. Okay, so we kind of understand what the problem is. And natural question is like, what if we could just ignore this outlier somehow and only align the inliers? And here we're proposing our algorithm that's called Drop-DTW that allows to simultaneously identify the outliers and only align the inliers with each other, leaving the outliers out of the matching procedure. And in this example with instructional videos of making latte, we would indeed align instructional steps to each other and sort of throw away things that are considered outliers. And we'll get this matching matrix where 0 columns and rows would correspond to the elements that were dropped. All right, so coming back to this cost matrix, what happens here is we decided we do not want to step in this high cost region. So what we'd like to do with DTW is that instead of having to match every element to something, we would allow to drop an element instead of matching it to something. And to implement this procedure, we introduce a new thing. It's called the drop cost. So drop cost is the cost one has to pay for dropping element from matching instead of matching it to anything else. And intuitively, so here are these drop costs. They're specific to every element. And intuitively, we would like to have lower drop cost for the outlier elements. So it would be rather cheap to drop them out of the alignment procedure and high drop cost for the signal and inlier elements. So we actually align them to something. And here we can see that this value is rather low for the outlier element, and it's very high for all other inlier elements. So this is just to give the intuition. And then once we perform the alignment with Drop-DTW, the optimal path would be sort of allowed to jump over this outlier element while paying this drop cost, and then keep matching the inlier elements to each other. So this is something we want. And how can we formalize this? Well, again, we can write it down as an optimization problem. It has two parts. First part is that we're matching signal. So we're matching inliers to each other. And the other part is that we're dropping the outliers. So for every row or column that consists only of zeros in the match matrix, which means that we drop the element, we have to pay the drop cost. And in the optimization problem set up this way, we're encouraged to match the elements to each other that have a low cost of matching and the elements that are not likely to be matched to anything will be simply dropped. And
Nikita,
then
may I ask questions now, or shall I?
Yeah, sure. You go ahead. Go ahead.
So with this approach, what type of outlier ratios do you think you should be able to handle? And also another question is, how, like, what would you say is a good mechanism for detecting what frame is an outlier? Does it really have to be a completely different take? Or is it only like if the viewpoint is just too different, but maybe still a part of what you want to see is there?
Yeah, so the way we define the drops is very important, and we'll get to this. Like I'll discuss it in particular, how we define these drops and like what you could do there. So we'll get there. Okay, so then we solve this thing, this minimization problem with dynamic programming, as we did in standard DTW. And then we get this output matrix that now, again, has ones to indicate the optimal path, and it's allowed to have 0 rows and columns that would indicate this jump. And then we can get the optimal cost as well. All right, so now let's again look under the hood of this Drop-DTW and how we're solving this with the dynamic programming, because this is like the heart of the algorithm, this dynamic programming algorithm. So now to accommodate for these drops without losing the generality of like all the possible transitions, we're going to fill not just a single table, dynamic programming table, but 2 tables at the same time, and they're going to communicate values between each other. So it's going to be table D+ and D-. So table D+ indicates the optimal cost of alignment with Drop-DTW, given that the end elements of these subsequences match to each other. So xj matches to zi. And D- alternatively indicates the optimal alignment cost with Drop-DTW, given that the last element xj has been dropped and zi has been matched to something else previously. And then the optimal cost in general for DTW is just the minimum between these two, because there are only 2 ways for xj to sort of behave. It's either matched or dropped in the end. And this is how we fill these tables. First, we fill the table D+, then D-, then we compute the optimum solution. And I will just illustrate briefly that like now we have more transitions, sort of more neighbors, because now we get this other table and they communicate between each other, as I said before, and the same for this table that sort of contains the dropped elements, and then we take the minimum. This is just how it's implemented, sort of. And finally, we when we filled in the table, as before, the optimal cost is going to be in the right bottom element of this table. And if you look at it, at how this dynamic programming is implemented, it has only operations of summation and minimum. And if we take a differential approximation of the minimum operator, like a soft mean or something like that, we will be able to make this whole procedure, alignment procedure, differentiable. And then this like Drop-DTW module gives us as an output just one value, this cost that's differentiable. So we can use optimal alignment cost as the loss function. And we will show later how we're doing this. And we can train representation using this loss, and it works quite well. And the same thing for the alignment path. We just like trace it back from this point, and we're good. And so now we understand that this jump here is not simply like a magical jump and we just pay this drop cost. In fact, we're just leaving table D+ in the other dimension, D-, we walk there, and then we come back here. And this is, well, we represent this as a jump just to make it more intuitive. All right, and now coming back to the sequences, we have identified the outlier, which corresponds to this element that we jumped over here. And the remaining elements, they are matched with each other as links. And this corresponds to these green points in the path. And as Igor mentioned, is like really depends on the drop cost, what is considered to be an outlier and what's considered to be an inlier. And in this work, we have experimented with two ways of defining the drop cost. So the first way is to basically take the percentile of the match cost. So we take this match cost matrix, we stretch it into an array, we sort it, and then we take the percentile there and we say, okay, so this is the drop cost. Everything that is like higher than that it should probably be an outlier, something like that. And defining it this way is sort of intuitive because we have a feeling of like what we think is supposed to be an outlier, and it's non-parametric. So it works well. You can use it with pre-trained features, and it's quite robust. And another way of defining the drop cost is actually training a neural network end-to-end that, given the elements, it would tell us, well, what are the drop costs basically. And if we train this whole system end-to-end and we differentiate through Drop-DTW, we can also train this sort of drop cost generator, and it's more general and it tends to work better when we have larger data sets. All right, so this is it for the sort of method section. Now I'm going to jump into the experiment. So if there are any questions here.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting, but I have one question here. Is
Sure.
the drop cost quite expensive because it's quadratic and nonlinear? So if the sequences are large, isn't it expensive and slow?
So no, it's not really expensive. Like it's just a single, well, multi-layer perceptron. And imagine that you're training your you have a ResNet. It embeds your frames, let's say, of the video, and then you have their like features, and you're gonna align these features. And somewhere along the like alignment, you will also run an MLP. So comparing to those ResNets, it's actually nothing. So in the like global scheme of things, it's not that much.
Yeah, I see. While using the neural network, it makes sense. But when you want to find the actual drop costs to train the neural network, you have to drop the column or row in the actual table that you were using dynamic programming on. So at that part is slow, right?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood.
Okay, so just continue after the talk. If I don't get my answer, I will come back in.
All right.
So,
I'll try to maybe illustrate it with some examples.
So I have another question related to how you define the drop cost for the learned drop cost. How do you define it, like in terms of values?
Oh, in terms of values.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like you just output these raw values, right? But then they must be somehow comparable with the match costs, right? Because like if your drop costs are way too high comparing to all match costs, then like you won't drop at all. If they're too low, you would drop everything. So then we sort of put them next to each other and we use some normalization like softmax or something like that. Because yeah, they gotta be somewhat relevant to the match costs, right?
I see. And the match cost here is computed like end to end, right? Or
so
is
the
this
match
feature?
costs, the match cost, like you get the features and then you compute like some dissimilarity between those features. So where's the example? Like here, right? You get like this feature and this feature, you compute their like dissimilarity, and like you get it here or like similarity, and then it's low, so it means that the cost is low, so it's like good. Then these two things are dissimilar, so the cost is high. Like this is just using the features, but the drop cost, like we have to define them somehow because it's like a new thing we introduce here.
I see, but the dissimilarity could be also due to like point view variance or like.
Exactly. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So,
That really depends on your feature extractor, right? You like get some embed those things, and then maybe your feature extractor was trained to, well, for digit classification, right? Then those things will be similar. But if it was trained for like location classifier, maybe they would be like very different, right?
I see. So
yeah.
Thanks.
No worries. All right, so the drop costs are defined, and now like this is sort of the whole pipeline that we're using here. And now we're gonna run a couple of experiments, and we will first apply our Drop-DTW as like the distance measure, and we're gonna use it for sequence retrieval with where sequences are noisy. Then we'll show how to use the differentiable version of Drop-DTW as a loss function to perform weakly or unsupervised representational learning in a single or multiple modalities. And finally, we'll show how to use Drop-DTW as for training or inference in the step localization and instructional videos. So, all right, now let's do the sequence retrieval. So for this task, we create a synthetic data set. So it consists of MNIST digits moving on the predefined trajectory. So here we define like simple trajectories as like moving on circles. Then we have moving on the figure infinity, or just like here, or just moving on diagonal. And we create this data set and we call it T-MNIST full. And then we create another data set that we call T-MNIST part. It's exactly the same data set, it's just that the digits here, they execute a random part of the full trajectory. Right, now we want to set up the retrieval task. So the first thing we're going to use for queries is going to be noisy and trimmed sequences. So trimmed sequences come from the T-MNIST part, and then we randomly blur some of the frames in those sequences. And the idea is to retrieve video sequences that are unaltered and like full trajectories in the T-MNIST full that we already have. And when we retrieve a sequence and it has the same digit moving along the same trajectory as the query, this retrieval is considered to be successful. And so here we compare Drop-DTW in green with standard DTW in red on the retrieval performance as we increase the number, like the percentage of frames blurred in the video. And we can see that Drop-DTW is quite robust to the noise in the sequences, and standard DTW basically breaks and cannot perform retrieval any longer. So why is this happening exactly? So this is how our retrieval looks. So our query is going to be the digit 0 moving along trajectory figure 8, and some of the frames are blurred, as you could see. So we run a retrieval with DTW as the similarity metric between sequences, and this is what it retrieves. Like the best match is actually a different digit moving along the right trajectory, and this is the ground truth. However, if we use Drop-DTW as similarity measure, we retrieve the correct example. Okay, so why is this happening exactly? Let's look what's behind this. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna take this query and the ground truth sequence that's supposed to be retrieved, and we're gonna align them to each other using DTW. And this is how the alignment frame by frame looks. So we can see that all these blurred frames, they're still present in the video. And here is this sort of optimal path in this in the match pairwise match cost matrix. And so we can see that all the outlier elements, like they have to be aligned because it's standard DTW. And every time we align an outlier to the inlier, this incurs a high cost. So the resulting alignment cost between these two sequences is high. And it's likely that there are other sequences that would give lower alignment cost, but they're not ground truth sequences. So this is why sort of retrieval suffers. And then we're gonna try to do the same thing with Drop-DTW. And here, if we look at the optimal path in the cost matrix, you can see that all these red columns and rows, they correspond to the elements that were dropped from the alignment. And now let us see how these like aligned videos without the drop elements look like. They look much more natural, and we can see that almost all the outliers were dropped out of the sequence. And now we don't have to align the outliers to inliers. It doesn't contribute to the cost. And well, we're good. We're now able to retrieve the correct elements. So this is sort of the intuition how Drop-DTW is better than standard DTW. And this intuition will be very useful for training representations, right? If we're trying to align some noisy sequences and use their similarity as the training signal, we would rather like filter out the noise somehow. So in this example, we're gonna align, so we're gonna train video representations in a weakly supervised manner. So what we have is the data set of video activities that are like tightly trimmed around the beginning and end. And we know the class of the activity. For example, is a tennis serve, or is the baseball pitch, or it's like some jumps in the water, stuff like that. And so now we're gonna follow the experimental setup proposed by Haji, exactly. So we're gonna take two videos that correspond to the same sport activity. We're gonna align them with Drop-DTW, while the original paper was doing it with a differentiable version of DTW. And we were gonna use the alignment cost as the loss. So this is reasonable because sequences representing the same activity must have low alignment cost. And we're gonna, since our procedure, alignment procedure is differentiable, we're gonna backpropagate so basically in the representations themselves and train everything end to end. Right. So to further study how this whole pipeline behaves under noise, we're gonna take the videos. So here is the same tennis serve example, and we're gonna further insert noise in these videos by just taking unrelated frames from other videos. And if we're gonna train from aligning these videos, it's a harder task basically. So we just want to study what's going to happen. And once we train this representation in like a weakly supervised manner, we just evaluate them. We take the network and we fine tune a linear classifier on top for action classification. And then we evaluate again Drop-DTW versus the baseline based on like this DTW, it's differentiable. And we can see again as like we insert more noise, the gap becomes higher. So like Drop-DTW works better. And even at zero noise, inserted noise, we perform already better with Drop-DTWs because, as I showed, there is some natural noise already in the sequences that, we're able to filter out. And now we're going to show how to use this Drop-DTW as a loss to train representation across different modalities in a completely unsupervised way. So here, we're going to try to align the audio signal with the visual signal in the videos. And we work with a data set of audiovisual events. So these are videos that contain events that have salient representation in both modalities, video and audio. So if we're trying to align signal from different modalities, we're actually likely to learn some meaningful common like multimodal representation there. So this is how we're gonna train the thing. We're gonna align audio and video signal from same video with Drop-DTW. And for evaluation, we're gonna use the learn features, and then we're gonna be given a tightly cropped event from one modality, and we'll have to retrieve the same event in a different modality. So like given just the audio signal, we'll have to retrieve the video part corresponding just to that audio signal, or vice versa. And if we use Drop-DTW for pre-training these features, first, we're doing better than other possible alignment algorithms that could be used to train end-to-end. And we also compare quite nicely to the supervised training, and we even outperform it on the video to audio retrieval evaluation. And we attribute that to the way we were training. So while in supervised training, they were just using like the labels where something happened versus something didn't happen within the same video, we were sort of contrasting to other videos with Drop-DTW, and that proved to be helpful. And finally, we will show how to use this Drop-DTW for a step localization and instructional videos. So what are the instructional videos? Well, these are videos that represent instruction execution step by step. So in the video, there is like instruction step that has start and end time. And we're going to approach this problem in a weakly supervised setup. So we're not going to have start and end time, just going to know the sequence of steps as they happen in the video. So more formally, for training and evaluation, we'll be given a video and a set of language step descriptions as they follow in the video. And what we have to do as like the result that we have to produce is that we have to find start and end time for every instructional step in the video. All right, so how are we gonna approach this problem using Drop-DTW during inference? So we're gonna take a video and transform it into like a set of sequence of features. Then we're gonna take the language description of instruction steps and embed each of them into vector representation. So now we have a sequence of vectors too. So basically now we have two sequences, and well, let's go ahead and align them to each other. And we're using this drop capability to drop things that are unrelated, drop things from the video that are unrelated to instruction steps. And then everything that has not been dropped can be labeled with one of the instruction steps. So we basically get this segmentation of the video. This is how we're using it at inference time. And here we compare Drop-DTW to other alignment algorithms. And we're showing that we're doing much better if we're using like pre-trained video and text features. We're doing much better than other methods because they are basically not designed to perform this task for various reasons. Like they just, well, this is a natural solution. Drop-DTW is a natural solution for the task of step localization in this way.
So I have a question, if I may.
Yes, sure.
So do I understand correctly that this in practice only works in settings where the switching between steps does not incur, does incur some switching between frames? So let's say I do a cooking show, and in a cooking show I have multiple steps, but the camera is all the time showing my, let's say, cutting board. Let's say I say first I cut the onions, then I cut the carrots. This will not be considered like the system will have a hard time recognizing it because there is no actual drop of as long as it's all the time showing my cutting board.
So if it's showing your cutting board, but you're like actually changing the ingredients that you're cutting on your cutting board, that's gonna work because, well, these video features, they contain the information about what is being cut, as well as the language, right? If you have onion, then you have tomato. Those are different ingredients, right? And then when you compute similarity of visual features of tomatoes with the language description, and this encoders, video and text encoders, they are like pre-trained to map in the same space, they will have high similarity, right? So then naturally they will align, and things that don't align will just be dropped. Okay, so at least when it's like sufficiently zoomed in, like if you know you have a whole picture standing in out, it's hard to see any tomato or any onion or that's correct. But then this is rather the limitation of like how do we train these like video encoders so we have the features. It's unrelated to the drop. It's super cool. But you got it right. Okay. So so for inference, we're doing better than others, and this is because like we designed it in a way that like we don't sacrifice anything. We can just align everything, drop things that we don't need, and we're still good. And then we'll show how to use it to actually train the representation. So far we were using pre-trained representations, and now what if we want to like train them from scratch or fine-tune them? So we're going to take the same thing, a video of the instruction execution, the sequence of instruction in that video. We're going to align them to each other, and we're going to use the cost of alignment as the loss. And we're just backpropagating it into features and into video and language features and we basically train them this way. And then we are comparing like our Drop-DTW method here to other pipelines, and we're doing better everywhere. So we experiment with 3 different data sets, all instructional videos, cross-task coin and UCook2. And on all of them, we're doing better than all other methods, because, well, this is a very natural way of training things, right? If we have a lot of noise in our videos, but we manage to sort of discover it while training, throw it away, and only train from the meaningful correspondences of language and video, we can train much better features. And this is what we can see here. And so this is it. This concludes basically the talk. Now this is just like a video of how we managed to align text instructions to the video itself. So here is the ground truth segmentation. Below is the one that we obtained with Drop-DTW. And so here around, you can see the annotation of DTW in color. And well, it does quite well. The drop capability indeed helps to filter out what doesn't need to be annotated. And so, yeah, to conclude, what we proposed is this Drop-DTW is the general purpose alignment algorithm that allows to handle outliers if needed. We managed to improve weakly-supervised and unsupervised representational learning in a single or multiple modalities. And finally, it sort of provides us a natural framework for weakly-supervised step localization, as we showed in the last application. Thank you very much. That's it.
Okay, Nikita, thanks so much. Yeah, I have already another question. So there is some ambiguity in what defines a step, I would say, and like,
right.
Where does the cutting of the onion end? Is it when you put it off the board? Is it when you have the carrot, the next, like the tomato or carrot on the board already? Do you have some thoughts on how to model this temporal ambiguity for things like cutting off boards? Is it even necessary? Is it even a problem in practice, or is this just you know, something that is a problem in theory?
Yeah. So I'd say it is not a problem. Like, I don't see a problem there, right? So, but eventually it is dictated by feature similarity between language and vision, right? As you start cutting things, and you're cutting an onion, and then your language description is saying cutting an onion. And then as long as you're cutting it, probably the similarity between those video and language feature is high. Then you like stop cutting it, probably the similarity is going down, you're still holding a knife, there is some onion lying around, but you're not cutting it anymore. And then, you know, you can sort of define where it ends by setting up this drop cost threshold, right? And this is how you can sort of model tighter or more like relaxed boundaries around the actions. But overall, I think for feature learning, if you want to learn features end to end, that doesn't matter like that much. You just want something in the middle there. It's from our experience.
Okay, yeah, cool. Any more questions?
So I was just wondering if, so it's obvious that drop, like the way you're modeling explicitly learning to drop frames is useful in this context. But what is there another approach where you don't have to explicitly model like dropping frames and just use the cost or similarity computation to determine the alignment without using dynamic programming? Because it seems like dynamic programming is the issue here. Is that the initial formulation of DTW is a constraint because you have to have like a continuous path.
Yes, I see what you're saying. I think we have one experiment where the drops themselves are not the part of the dynamic programming. You sort of, let's go to this example. I think it will be clear enough. Okay, so there we have one baseline where we look at this matrix of match cost, and then we're trying to find like columns or rows that just have high values everywhere, and we say, okay, those guys are probably outliers, let's throw them away. And then we consider only frames that are left, and then we run standard DTW on them, right? So then drops are done first. They're not part of the optimal solution. They're not part of dynamic programming. And then everything that's left is being aligned to each other with DTW. And DTW can align what is left optimally, okay? I think this is similar to what you're describing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, and then we have some, wait, I'm getting there. Yes, it's called greedy drop plus DTW. And for inference, it doesn't work that well. And you can also see why, because it doesn't allow you to model temporarily what you're dropping and what you're not dropping. You may just drop all the things in the video and it will perforate your video. Then you align it and you won't be able to get precise like start and end time, because maybe you drop this, and this, and then you'll have to like scatter it back on your sequence, this segmentation, and it will be perforated. And also it's not an optimal way to drop things, right? Because it's not aware of how you're gonna align things after. So yeah, this is basically a meaningful baseline here.
I see. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? I think this is not the case. Then Nikita, let me thank you again for taking your time and for being with us today. And thanks for the super interesting talk. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much for inviting. And if there's like a last thing I could say, I mean, it's a robotic reading group, and I've been thinking of how like this whole thing can be useful. And I guess one may use it for like imitation learning when you have like execution sequences by, well, I don't know, a person or someone else, and then you would like to copy them with a robot or something like that. I guess this thing can be, it's worth exploring if it hasn't been yet. So I guess maybe someone will get
it's super
inspired.
interesting. Actually, your comment is spot on. So one of the problems we have in imitation learning is getting meaningful instructional videos, or let me say it differently, taking the instructional videos that already are available and making them more meaningful for robots. And yeah, that's super relevant.
Well, yeah, I hope that will be useful.
Yeah, okay.
All
so
right.
Once again, thanks so much for your talk. And everyone, if you have more questions for Nikita, I think you can find them on our Slack. So I'm sure he will be happy to chat with you guys.
Yes, we're happy to chat. Thank you very much for the invitation. Good luck, guys.
Bye.